Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's good to see everybody. I hope you've all had great holidays and Christmas and New Year's and all that jazz. Um, yeah, no snow on the ground, so can't complain. Um, I actually went to Niagara Falls over the holiday, which was cool. Um, favorite thing, we went to Fort Niagara, which I had never heard of. And it was cool because it was like another one of those like there's this old fort that's been there since the 1700s, and that was the access point in and out of French Canada, French Canada, and so it's like the fort that was like the main choke point for the British French Indian Indian wars. Uh, it was fascinating, really interesting history. Um, which is one of those things. It's like the same principle that we've talked about on our maps. You have the same types of things actually all over the Great Lakes. In northern Minnesota, there's a village called Grand Portage that I absolutely recommend going to. I love Grand Portage. Grand Portage is like that used to be on the world map in like the 1600s, 1700s, before New York ever made it on the world map. Grand Portage, Minnesota, was on the world map because that was the central point for the entire world's fur trade economy. Um, and like, anyway, so going to Niagara Falls, it's one of those things. It's like once you understand the paradigm of the mapping that we've gone through, you see how it applies just all through history everywhere you go because it's how geography works. Anyways, it was super cool. It was a great trip. I'd never been there before, and obviously, yeah, when I went, I was thinking about this class. so, um, so yeah, as is tradition, I'm James. I'm a husband and a father. I own an automotive business. I have a degree in biblical and theological studies and ancient Near Eastern history. Although I'm not an expert in anything, um, we have a few new faces. I appreciate everybody coming. If you have questions on anything, or you have problems with anything that I say tonight, I would encourage you to go all the way back to session one, um, and that might help give some clarity as to what I'm after or what I'm trying to do. Um, and I apologize for any failures to do that. But all of this started back in October. We discussed a specific epistemological and hermeneutic framework that I've developed over the course of my life. Um, we spent 8 weeks building a foundational paradigm um, so that I could say this sentence and hope that it makes sense. That being, the revelation of God is inherently contradictory. The biblical text describes a God defined beyond all knowledge, but also wants to be known. The moment the knowledge of God transcends the boundary between what is not known to what is known, that God no longer is transcendent, but rather is continuous and becomes defined by what is known. And so this is the fundamental concern of the biblical text, is how can humanity know God without God being entirely defined by all that is known? This is the fundamental issue that we are seeking an answer for. Another way to think of it is how can God be known as this without becoming known as something like this? Um, we then discussed the setting of the biblical text. We established a concept of the land in between and how the flow of water determines the flow of the trade routes. We read in Genesis 11 and we took out our maps and began mapping the stories of the patriarchs. Now, we started with Terah, the father of Abraham, and the route he took along the Euphrates River, going from Ur up to Haran. He gets to Haran and stops halfway through his journey, having never made it to Canaan. His legacy is therefore forever known as an idol worshiper. We then read Genesis 12 and we see Abram continue where his father leaves off. and he goes from Haran and he goes to Canaan into the land in between. And we follow Abram's journey to Shechem, down to Bethel, to Beersheba, and into the Negev. And sure enough, as soon as Abram finally reaches Canaan, he then has to immediately leave because the land does what the land will do, and it has a famine. And so we follow Abram. He immediately leaves Canaan and proceeds onward to Egypt. So now in our last session, I skipped over a point in the story because we were really focused on doing the maps. But there's an important story in the text that tonight we're going to draw attention to. So when Abram goes to Egypt, we read the following story in Genesis 12. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, and they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princess of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I might have took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So what on earth is this passage about? Is there any meaning to be gleaned from this? If we do some Googling and we see what we can find, what you'll find is a general consensus that this story is really, really messed up. Abram is described as being a liar who would willingly let his wife be defiled in order to gain wealth. This screen grab shows a good idea on the sorts of dialogues people today will interpret from a text like this. This person posed in a popular internet forum. They said, does Genesis 12 really say what I think it says? So I'm reading the Bible for the first time and was a bit shocked when I read Genesis 12, as it seems to be saying that Abram pimped out his wife to Pharaoh. Am I correct? Am I reading, or is something else going on here? And if I'm correct, how have Jews and Christians traditionally explained this? And here we see somebody's response. I quote, that's not a bad reading of it. One thing I find interesting about this story, and the parallel of which King Abimelech marries Sarah, is the utter callousness and cruelty shown towards women. Sarah in particular. Throughout the patriarch stories, we see that if a man wants a woman as his wife, he simply takes her in what we would today describe as kidnapping and rape. Abraham stands by, not only permitting the arrangement, but profiting handsomely from it. And it's not like Pharaoh/Abimelech is intended as the villain either. Genesis 20 specifically says that Abimelech had integrity in his heart. It's helpful to remember that the author of these stories was not at all interested in telling stories with a moral lesson to them. However, much Sunday school teachers may try to wring one out of them. In fact, my wife, herself a Sunday school teacher, once told me how frustrating it was trying to find any positive moral in such stories when she taught them. These brief tales exist for other reasons. In these cases, to explain where Abraham acquired his vast wealth, and to give etiologies for certain place names that existed in the author's day. These are not the Jewish equivalents of Aesop's fables. This is a perfect example. Oh, end quote. This is a perfect example of what I'm trying to address in this class. Going all the way back to session one, you really think the author of these stories was not at all interested in telling stories with a moral lesson to them? And even if the authorial intent isn't to make a claim about morality, why can't we? Because I bet if you use the hermeneutic tools available to you, you can come up with a logical framework of interpreting meaningful meaning from a text like this that, if nothing else, will help you understand the juxtaposition between how we think today versus the descriptions of the people in these stories in a setting that is very far away, living in circumstances that we have such a hard time understanding and relating to today. I simply do not think it is a fair statement to make of this text. Simply because you don't like the moral framework or supposed lack of a moral framework being expressed doesn't mean it means that. I actually think the opposite, and will go so far as to say that by presupposing that this specific text is morally corrupt, that is actually the very reason you will fail to see the moral framework being expressed. So let's propose a different path instead of the internet forums. So, a couple of things I want to address about this passage. First off, perhaps one of these classes we will discuss hospitality in Semitic thought. Hospitality was understood to be one of the greatest moral and ethical responsibilities of the time. Nearly all moral dilemmas were filtered through the highest priority of hospitality first. I'd like to discuss this more, but we don't have time right now. But I do hope to come back to it in the future. But the ideas of hospitality, I believe, are crucial in interpreting several of these texts from Genesis. But bottom line, in this passage, we see a hospitality issue arise. Now, in session 8, we had discussed the initial genealogy of Terah and how his three sons are emphasized in the text. And it seems to be because it's expressing the patriarchal and matriarchal authorities. Sarai was both Abram's half sister and his wife. It is in the genealogy. The text is expressing the following framework. The preservation of life comes first. So even though Abram probably did not want Pharaoh to take Sarai, he knew if the Egyptians knew she was his wife, they would kill him. In other words, the text is expressing Abram's perspective of the moral standard of hospitality of Pharaoh at that time. Abraham thought Pharaoh would not have any problem killing a husband in order to take their wife. This is fundamentally a mistreatment of foreigners in somebody else's sovereign land. More than likely, a pharaoh that would be willing to do this to a foreigner would not do this to an Egyptian. So the question you should ask is, why, if Abram is Sarai's brother, would that spare Abram's life? Because the oldest male, especially in the absence of a father, would have patriarchal authority, and that authority would come with it the responsibility to the younger siblings in the preservation of their lives, regardless of being foreigners in somebody else's sovereign land. For example, Abram would have had the moral responsibility of finding his sister a husband, and Pharaoh would have had the moral responsibility of winning the favor of a patriarch for marriage. And so, instead of killing Abram to take his wife, the Pharaoh now had a moral responsibility to woo Abram into allowing Pharaoh to marry Sarai. So, by following the social norms of patriarchal family structures, Pharaoh was morally obligated not just to spare Abram's life, but to actually work to find favor with Abram so that Pharaoh could marry Sarai. If you think, if given the choice between a decision that will potentially kill you versus a decision that will potentially benefit everybody involved, you are absolutely kidding yourself if you think you are any different, even in today's day and age. What the text is expressing from the viewpoint of Abram, this is how Abram perceives Pharaoh's framework of morality. We have a spectrum of 0 through 10. 0 is the lowest level of priority of moral decisions. 10 is the highest priority of moral decisions. The primary thing dictating everything prior, meaning whatever your low point is will be trumped by something that is higher. So Abram thinks Pharaoh knows Pharaoh has unlimited sovereignty, because that's what it means to be Pharaoh. If push comes to shove, Pharaoh's right to act on his sovereignty will trump any other moral he has. Maybe he would be willing to commit adultery and just take Sarah as his wife, but I bet not. He would probably murder me instead. In other words, from the perspective of Abram thought Pharaoh would uphold the traditions of marriage and adultery over murder. But maybe the same social norms that prevent Pharaoh from committing adultery and would have him murder Abram instead might be the same social norms that can save Abram. So if I'm the oldest brother of Sarai, maybe Pharaoh will uphold the social standards and ancient Near Eastern marriage traditions that will spare his own life. And so Abram assumes this is the framework of Pharaoh's morality. Now, Abram's view of Pharaoh is not the same as Pharaoh's view. Here is the same concept, but from Pharaoh's perspective. From Pharaoh's perspective, it could be not committing adultery is a higher moral standard to uphold, which is why he will uphold the social expectations of wooing a patriarch in order to take someone's daughter for marriage. And these moral actions are a higher moral priority than even Pharaoh's right to sovereignty, which also overrides his moral standard for murder. Now, if we really want to get metaphysical about this, we could actually say that this isn't even Pharaoh's actual framework of morality. We could say it's the text expression of the framework of Pharaoh's morality. And it's the text's perspective of Abram's perspective of Pharaoh's perspective of morality. Or take another step back and we could say, this is all my perspective of the text's perspective, of Abram's perspective, of Pharaoh's perspective, of Pharaoh's own morality. Or whatever you just thought is your perspective of my perspective, of the text's perspective, of Abram's perspective, of Pharaoh's perspective of morality. Or maybe now it's a perspective of my perspective, of your perspective, of our, right? You just see how it just builds, right? This, in actuality, is what hermeneutics is about. This is why I say every week I have no idea what I'm talking about, because the meaning changes depending on the point of view you take in a given moment. But let's continue on. Coming back to reality, let's think about this idea. We have morally ascribed to Abram's perspective of Pharaoh. And we see an idea of what Pharaoh's morality might actually be. Why might Pharaoh, the ultimate, most sovereign, supreme being in all of the land, not hold his sovereignty at a higher standard than the social constructs of ancient Near Eastern patriarchy or marriage or adultery. Because not upholding these sorts of things might actually threaten his very sovereignty. The frameworks of patriarchy, marriage, and adultery are actually matters of hospitality. They are matters of how you treat your fellow human. They are foundations that allow for society to exist. There are good kings and there are bad kings. There are good judges and bad judges. There is justice and there is corruption. And I would argue any given person's position of power relative to any matter at hand, the lower their right to sovereignty is relative to other matters of morality, the more righteous and just that person in a position of power is. Some kings hold their sovereignty at a higher standard than anything else. And when they act on that belief, that is when you hear of phrases like corrupt politicians or unjust judges. And so, the text might be telling us, at least from my perspective, Abram, being a foreigner, was in a position of weakness, and he did not know how just this Pharaoh was. And so the text, while telling us Abram's viewpoint of Pharaoh, is also inadvertently telling us what Abram's framework of morality was as well. Seems to be not dying was of the highest, most utmost concern. It would trump everything else. His allegiance to his patriarchal duty, I think, trumps his sovereign rights because it's what gives him those rights. If nothing else, his sovereign rights don't mean anything relative to Pharaoh. But Abram's sovereign rights do mean something relative to Sarai. So his hope to save his life was to establish himself as Sarai's brother, to find favor with Pharaoh instead of death. He doesn't establish any sovereign control over Pharaoh, and the byproduct is the potential for Pharaoh to commit adultery, the very thing seemingly at the highest level of Pharaoh's own morality, aside from his sovereign rights as Pharaoh. So I want to go back to this for a second. What I am trying to say is the actual reality of Pharaoh's morality is not what the text is concerned with. What I am saying is, from my perspective, the text is trying to express certain ideas and frameworks in order to communicate something of meaning. And so the text is using this to say something, even if this isn't actually what was literally the case. It's not like we know what Pharaoh actually thought. And nobody, including Abraham, actually knows if Pharaoh would have actually committed murder in order to not commit adultery and break the social patriarchal norms. Poor Pharaoh in this story is never given the option. He's just assumed to be evil from the get-go. It doesn't actually matter what the literal, actual reality was of Pharaoh, or even Abram for that matter, but that might be getting too meta. What matters is the framework the text is seeing to build and establish. For what other reason is there to say what it says, if not at least for that? Now, you might ask, how do I know the text is trying to build a framework? My answer to that is because it repeats these frameworks. That is why we are doing what we are doing. And to me, that is what we want to pay attention to. What are the frameworks that are being built upon as we go through the text? And what is the subject matter of those frameworks? Because again, somehow this all has to do with revealing God as being this without becoming known as this. I simply don't know how else it could attempt to do this other than through concepts of logic and paradigms. What is most interesting to me is how much of the content has to do with the preservation of life and morality. So with that, let's continue. And I think we can take out map number 2. We will have a little bit of mapping to do, not a lot, but some, and you'll need a green marker. Okay, so upon returning from Egypt, Abram goes back to Canaan. We then read in Genesis 20. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife." Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, "Lord, will you kill an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister'?" And she herself said, "He is my brother." In the integrity of my heart, in the innocence of my hands, I have not done this. Then God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all of his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you see that you did this thing?" And Abraham said, "I did it because I thought, there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, 'This is the kindness you must do me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants and gave them to Abraham and returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, 'Behold, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you.' To Sarah he said, 'Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and female slaves so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." And so here we see another very similar story repeating itself. We see the same moral thought paradigm brought up forth again. Abram assumes the people of Gerar are godless, and Abimelech will kill Abram in order to not commit adultery in taking Sarai as his wife. So now, let's take out map number 2, and we'll find Beersheba, which we have highlighted and I think circled. And um, Beersheba is in the Negev in the south. Um, and So yeah, find Beersheba, and then west of Beersheba, we're looking for the city of Gerar. um, so let's see. Basically, we want to draw a green arrow going from Beersheba over to Gerar like this. You can kind of see this. Yep. So from Beersheba over to Gerar. Okay. Then we come to Genesis 21, And it says this: At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his armies, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants or with my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of flock apart. And Abimelech said to Abraham, What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines, or back to Gerar. And Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. So now, going from Gerar, we're going to draw a green arrow going back to Beersheba, like this. Yep. Beersheba, Gerar is here. Back and forth. Like that? Yep. So I said it a couple of weeks ago when we made this big circle. This is Abraham's tromping grounds. This is where he spends most of his life once he enters the land, and this is where Isaac spends the entirety of his life and never leaves. And we just read this story of Abimelech and Abraham regarding Sarai, and it's the same exact construct that we read about when Abraham goes down to Egypt. And at the end, there's this peace treaty, and Abraham makes a covenant with Abimelech, and they exist. Notice, too, the fight over a well of water, which is something we will talk more about. But moving on. So now we read in Genesis 23. Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron, which we have highlighted on our maps, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham rose up from before his dead and said to the Hittites, I am a sojourner and foreigner among you. Give me property among you for a burying place, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites answered Abraham, Hear us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will withhold from you his tomb to hinder you from burying your dead. Abraham rose and bowed to the Hittites, the people of the land. And he said to them, If you are willing that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat of me Ephron, the son of Zohar, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence as property for a burying place. Now Ephron was sitting among the Hittites. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in hearing of the Hittites, of all who went in at the gate of his city. Now, my lord, hear me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the sight of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed down before the people of the land, and he said to Ephron, in the hearing of the people of the land, But if you will hear me, I give the price of the field, accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. Ephron answered Abraham, My Lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weights current among the merchants. So the field of Ephron and Machpelah, which was east of Mamre, the field with the cave that was in it, all the trees that were in the field, throughout its whole area, was made over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the Hittites, before all who went in the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, east of Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is in it were made over to Abraham as property for a burying place by the Hittites. Where did Abraham get the money? From Sarah, from Abimelech. So again, there are things within this text I would love to talk about, but we don't have time, and we will come back to some of that passage. But I will say this as it's important in the future. One, this is the first time in the text Abram buys property. And notice when he does, the text tells us who is in charge of the governmental district, that being the Hittites. It seems the city Abram goes to when he purchases land is in Hebron. So we conclude the Hittites at this time had the majority control of the local trade districts, and their government center was Hebron. Why Hebron? Notice Abram goes to the city gates for a public hearing with Ephron and the Hittites to purchase the land. There's more I could say about this, but we'll leave it at that for now. Now go to your map, draw a green arrow going up from Beersheba to Hebron like this. What?
Criticizing that it wasn't exactly like your squiggle.
Oh, yes. It's Beersheba north to Hebron.
This one.
So here's Beersheba. No, Hebron is right here.
I saw it go way up here.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. You're buried in the front.
Oh. So if we'll recall a couple weeks ago, Hebron is the fortified city on the ridge route. At 3,000 feet, it's the access point from the Negev going into the hill country. It's a very, very important city. It's why the Hittites are using it as their governmental center. And it's why Abram goes there to buy land, and it's also why he wants to buy land there. All right, so we find Hebron. We want to circle Hebron in green. So somewhere around Hebron is the land Abram purchases with the money that Sarai got from Abimelech. Purchases the land and he buries Sarai. And out from there, we go to Genesis 24 and we read the following. Now, Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, Put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of the heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, Perhaps the women may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, See to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send an angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine, only you must not take my son back there. So Abraham's servant goes to Nahor in Aram, the region of Haran, where all of this started, where Terah, Abram's father, stopped midway in his journey to Canaan. Abraham's servant goes back to find a wife for Abraham's son Isaac, because Isaac was not supposed to leave the land of Canaan, and certainly was not supposed to go back to Haran. And now we then begin the story of the second generation finally. This story starts where the first generation began, starting with bringing Rebekah from Haran to Canaan like Abram. Then we get to Genesis 26, which we went through a few weeks ago, but we're going to reread it. So here we go. Now, there was a famine in the land. You see the repetition. There's a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all of these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister. For he feared to say my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister? Isaac says to him, because I thought lest I die because of her. Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servant had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, that water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that. And so he called its name Sitnon. And he moved on from there and dug another well. And they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. From there he went up to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you. and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzah his advisor and Phicol the commander of his army, Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." So we said, "Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have not done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now blessed of the Lord." So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city of Beersheba to this day. Doesn't that sound super familiar? Notice in the second generation, upon learning that Rebekah is Isaac's sister, Abimelech doesn't even try to marry her. It's like he learned the lesson from the first time around. And notice again in the second generation, it's Abimelech who approaches Isaac to make a covenant, to maintain peace. The power dynamic and burden of sovereignty had shifted within one generation from Abimelech to Isaac. So, what might we interpret from the text about these stories? For me, I see an example of something we will discuss in depth in a few weeks. And it's the idea that the context of a circumstance affects the priority of morality. In all cases of these stories, it is clear there is an utmost concern from all parties that the wives would not be defiled in adultery. And it's any given person's inability of knowing which matter would be of highest priority that determined why and how these people behave towards each other. And what I love about these stories is, to me, it seems by the end, we see an epistemological evolution of Abimelech, of a man whose moral hierarchy evolves, and by the end is textually ascribed as the opposite of Abraham's perspective of Pharaoh. We see the story of Abimelech ending where his right as the sovereign would not override his social patriarchal duties or the requirements of marriage that would be owed to Abraham, Isaac, Sarai, and Rebekah. And he certainly would not murder somebody's husband in order to do so. And so to me, I see the opposite of what I read online when I search this passage. I see an example of what it means to be sovereign, what it means to uphold the preservation of life, what it means to prioritize or deprioritize cultural expectations and social norms for higher, more immediate, more important matters of morality. I see the idea of what it means to be just, that all because you are a king does not mean you can kill people because you want to sleep with somebody. And if you think that fact doesn't still apply today or have ramifications for how you live your life today and how you will experience the same sorts of moral dilemmas today, I think you're kidding yourself. So we see this idea of a just sovereign ruler. And now we're going to break our mold from what we've been doing in class so far, and we're going to jump 1,000 years into the future. And we're going to jump generations later. And I want to discuss another similar story where we see this same paradigm play out. And after we are done reading this, you tell me if you think the text isn't saying something about morality and the preservation of life and what a just society is. And so we read in the books of Samuel. Ooh, a new book. Oh man, I didn't copy the. I'm going to read from here. I'll try to. Okay. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, as she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. So David sent word to Joab, Send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, Go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When they told David, Uriah did not go down to his house. David said to Uriah, Have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Uriah said to David, The ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and his servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, Remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next, and David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his lord, but he did not go down to his house. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab. And some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting, and he instructed the messenger, When you have finished telling all the news about the fighting to the king, then if the king's anger arises, and if he says to you, Why did you go so near the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech the son of Jerubbesheth? Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall, so that he died at Thebez? Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, The men gained an advantage over us, and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. And the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. Also, David said to the messenger, Thus shall you say to Joab, Do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours now one and now another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and encourage him. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. It's so the culmination of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, generations later. Finally, the descendants are in the land, and they have a king. They have prosperity. They have property. They have fortifications. They are pillaging for control of gated cities and the outskirts of the land across the Jordan and Rabbah, which is on your map. They have trade routes. And David, being king, is supposed to be warring as kings do. But instead, he stays in the capital city, relaxing on a couch, not doing what he is supposed to be doing. And he becomes the exact thing Abram and Isaac were scared of Pharaoh and King Abimelech would do to them. And I kid you not, from this point forward in the text, this single action by King David unwinds everything that comes before it. David's firstborn son dies, and his kingdom fizzles away, eventually leading to exile. And they go back to Babylon, back to the region of Ur. And so, how do these stories reveal the knowledge of who God is? We see the idea of a sovereign creator who would uphold what is morally just, even if that sovereign creator has the sovereign power to do otherwise. This God is not like these gods. This God will deprioritize its sovereign right in order to uphold a higher standard of justice. These gods won't. And so, as like in Eden, we see another example where the knowledge of good and evil, the epistemology of morality, is tied to the knowledge of who God is and who God is not. So, I don't remember off the top of my head. This one here on the left is Ra, which is the Egyptian god. Or not the Egyptian gods, the main Egyptian god. Pharaoh is also God. So this sentence I just said a little bit ago, and I was like, this God is not like these gods. Pharaoh is God in Egypt. So it's a true statement. But yes, the sun god is Ra. The god on the right, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. That's one of the gods from Ur. And I talk about that in, I think it was week 2 or week 3. And I'm just using these gods as kind of fill-ins for pretty much all of the gods that you see within the different cultures of, Egypt and Canaan and Babylon. And
So as you studied a lot of this history, how many different gods estimated?
I think again, probably like week 2 or 3, I kind of allude to that what I believe is this idea of the God as described in the Bible, God the creator, is not defined with anything inside of reality. And so these gods, the idea of ancient Near Eastern mythologies, the word I've used is as continuous or continuity. We have transcendent and we have continuity. And the frameworks of continuous gods, to me, there's no rational limitation on what can be God. So to answer the question how many gods there are, anything rationally becomes God, which is why the Nile is God, the sun is God, the cats are God, the Pharaoh is God, the firstborn children are God, right? There's no rational point in stopping, if that makes sense. So with that, we're done for tonight. Oh man. So thanks for coming. I hope it was fun. I apologize if this went really long. But we have now journeyed from Eden to Terah and Haran to Abraham and Canaan down to Egypt, back to Beersheba, hung out in the Negev, to Isaac, who's finally born, lives, and dies in the land without ever leaving it. And next, we'll discuss Jacob and Joseph, and then we will finally get to Moses. And we'll get to what this object is about. So we're getting there, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'll see you all next week.